nirasya sarva sandeham ekikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram. Nama shrestam manumapi shachiputramatra swarupam rupam tasyagrajamurupurim maturim gushtavatim radha kundam girivaramaho radhikamadavasham prapto yasya pratita kripaya shri gurum tam natosmi. Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Bilashujitan Purna Prema Rasutsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannanan Shajvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payo Rasho Murakedato Vande Bhagavatani Mananudavam Murdna Nipatyakshito. Namo Mahavaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tvishe Nama Jayatam Surito Pango Mama Mandamate Gati Matsarvasva Param Bhojo Radha Madana Mohana Kulari Devatamar Madana Mohan Jar Sevak Raghunath Rup Sanatan Jaya Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Raghunath Echai Goshai Kori Charana Vandan Jaha Hoite Vignanasha Bhishta Puram Adadanas Trinam Dantoir Yacheham Puna Puna Srimad Rupa Parambojo tulītāṁ Janma Janmani. So by the grace of Shri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Swabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Avatar, Prema Purushottam, Karuna Maha Sagar, Shri Gauranga Maha Prabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnav Acharyas, Shri Rupa Goswami Pad. Again, today we continue our discussion of Shri Rupa Pada's Padyavali. So in our last 5 classes, we discussed verse 14, which spoke about the rarity, preciousness, and difficulty to attainness of Prema. And it was described as being so difficult to attain because it can be attained only by lolya, or lobha, hankering, intense desire. So we had some discussion of the works of Shri Rupa, Shri Jiva, Shri Chakravarti Pad, and Shri Radhakrishna Das Goswami, pertaining to the topic of this intense desire, what it is, what are its characteristics, and how it is attained, and what is to be done by those who don't have it, but desire that desire. So, in essence, the primary practice was said to be to hear about the object of the desire, to hear about the ragatmika bhakti of Krishna's eternal associates, such that that desire may be nourished within the heart. And other forms of sadhana are to be done on the basis of such hearing, and for the sake of nourishing such hankering. And it is that hankering alone that leads to the attainment of that ragatmika bhakti, and therefore is described in the verse as the price to be paid to purchase it. And as was given by Kaviraj Goswami in the verse of Govinda Lilamrita that we discussed, Gada lolyaika labhya, that prema seva to Radha's pranabandhu is attainable only by intense hankering. So in that way, the second verse of this section about the fortune of Prema, or the section which stresses why Prema is considered such a great fortune, was discussed. So now, today, we'll discuss verse 15, which is the third and final verse of this prakaran, which presents from another perspective why Prema is regarded as such a high or great fortune. So, next, the compiler cites a verse which directly compares Prema with the attainments of other paths and shows that it has no equal. In this way, he further illustrates why Prema is fit to be regarded as the ultimate spiritual fortune. Jñānam asti tulitaṁ ca tulāyāṁ, Prema naiva tulitaṁ tu tulāyāṁ, siddhir tulitatra tulāyāṁ, kṛṣṇa-nāma tulitaṁ na tulāyāṁ. Jñāna can be measured and equaled on a scale, but Prema can never be equaled on a scale. A siddhi can certainly be equaled on a scale here, but Krishna's name can never be equaled on a scale. So there's a little bit of a play on words here which doesn't come through in English. If you see in each line of the verse, you have the word tulitaṁ and tulāyāṁ. So the word tula is a word for a balance or a scale, something on which things are weighed. So to say that something can be tulita on a tula is to say that it can be equaled on an equalizer or balanced on a balance or something like that. So it would ring like that in English if it worked, so to speak, to say it that way. So it's saying you can equal gyan on a scale. In other words, there are other things that are as weighty or as valuable or more valuable than gyan, but not more weighty, not more valuable than prema. Siddhis can be equaled in value by other things, but Krishna's name cannot. So this is a statement of Sridhar Samipad. So what is the import of jnana being equalable and prema not? Then we'll look a little bit at what the commentator offers as an explanation. The commentator explains that jnana can be equaled by bhakti, and not only sadhya bhakti, but even sadhana bhakti specifically, insofar as both jnana and sadhana bhakti are removers of the adjuncts or upadhis of maya from the jiva, and thus bestowers of moksha. The idea is not, however, that jnana and sadhana bhakti are equal in all respects. Rather, the point being made is that sadhana bhakti can also provide the same benefits that jnana can, as well as lead to an even greater attainment, namely prema. So, jnana can be equaled, which is to say that bhakti can also produce the same effect as jnana. What does jnana ultimately do? It frees one from avidya. It frees one from the presence of the adjuncts of maya, such that one can have unmediated perception of the nature of the self. So bhakti can also bring that about. So therefore, bhakti can equal gyan, or you don't need gyan to attain something superlative, and what you can achieve through gyan, you can also achieve through bhakti. Prema, furthermore, as stated in the second line of the verse, cannot be equaled by gyan or yoga or anything else, since prema not only secondarily leads to the attainment of moksha, but also captivates even Sri Bhagavan himself, and thus brings about an experience of superlative bliss that can never be attained even in the midst of direct perception of Brahman, the highest attainment on the path of Jnana. So we hear in the Taittiriya Upanishad, as cited by Jiva Goswami in the Priti Sandarbha, about what is called the Ananda Mimamsa, or the respectful analysis of the presence of bliss in various states of being. So going by powers of 10, the ultimate happiness that any human being could ever experience on the earth is taken as one unit, or you can call that bliss. But then 10 times greater than that is the bliss to be found among the Gandharvas and among Swarga and by Brahma, and like this it goes up and up and up, all the way to the point of referring to the bliss of direct perception of Brahman, or what's called Brahmananda. And it's so many powers of 10 greater, so as to indicate it's unlimited. But the what's called bhakti ananda, or the ananda that can be experienced by bhakti, through perception of not the nirvishesh prakash of the paratattva, namely Brahman, but the savishesh prakash, or the differentiated, the variegated form of the paratattva, namely Bhagavan. There can be a greater depth of experience of bliss, a greater order of completion in the manifestation of spiritual energy. So, because bhakti alone and not gyan leads to that superlative experience of spiritual bliss, it is more weighty, or this prema, or this bhakti, which can bring that about, is considered to be unequaled by gyan or anything else if you put it into comparison. The commentator cites 2 verses from Srimad Bhagavatam to illustrate how it is that prema specific, how it is prema specifically that captivates Sri Bhagavan. It's okay. Quote, "This form of Bhagavan, the son of a Gopika, namely Sri Krishna, the son of Mother Yashoda, is not easily attained by those who identify with the body, by jñānis, or even by those manifest from his own self, namely Brahma, Shiva, Lakshmi, and others, as he is by those endowed with bhakti here. That is, as he is by those with prema bhakti, that is imbued with the bhava of the residents of Braja." So here you have a statement in the Bhagavatam which puts in direct contrast a analysis of what jñānis can achieve, or what is attained by jñānis, and what is achieved by bhaktas. So here the topic is the form of Bhagavan. How is the form of Bhagavan attained? It's attained by bhaktas to a degree in order of completion greater than it is by jñānis. So this shows that it is bhakti that captivates Bhagavan, that compels Bhagavan to reveal himself in his full manifestness, and thus has a greater pull over him, or greater degree or capability to captivate him. And a second verse is cited in this regard, regarding an Uttam Bhagavat. "One whose heart Hari himself, he who destroys multitudes of sins even when called unintentionally, does not leave because his lotus feet are bound there by a rope of love, is said to be the foremost of devotees of Bhagavan." So this comes at the end of the gradation in analysis of the characteristics of bhaktas given in the 11th canto, and this is the final description of a Mahabhagavat, which according to some of the commentaries describes the ultimate category of Mahabhagavatas, what ultimately is the capability or the characteristic that the highest order of Mahabhagavats have that others don't. They have the greatest ability to hold Bhagavan within their heart, or they have the greatest degree of prem, such that Bhagavan becomes captivated by them to the greatest extent. So the commentator here on Padyavali, he added a nice point in regard to this Bhagavatam verse. In regard to the description in the second citation of Sri Hari's becoming bound by the rope of his bhakta's love, the commentator offers the illustration of a blue sapphire shining in the midst of golden setting. Or in other words, if Krishna or Krishna's feet is compared to a blue sapphire, then this prem of these Bhagavatas is like the gold in which that stone is set as a pendant or as a necklace or what have you. So in this way, it's understood that prema cannot be compared because nothing captivates Bhagavan more, nothing leads to a degree of bliss, of higher bliss than prema. So prema cannot be equaled, but jnana can. So now we come to the second half of the verse. The term siddhi in the third line of the verse, under discussion, refers to the siddhis that can be attained through yoga practice, such as the abilities to become light, heavy, large, or small at will. Sometimes there's a group of 8 siddhis given as a standard set, but there are others as well. All such siddhis are abilities specific to embodiment within the realm of samsara, and thus can certainly be equaled and surpassed by the attainments that can come about on the path of bhakti, since by observance of the path of bhakti, one can attain anything that can be attained on other paths. So here's a statement in the Bhagavatam, quote, spoken by Bhagavan Sri Krishna: everything that is attained by means of duties, austerity, jnāna, non-attachment, yoga, charity, and other means to auspiciousness, my bhakta easily attains by means of the practice of bhakti to me. If my bhakta somehow desires, meaning my bhakta wouldn't even want it, but somehow or another, if it came about that my bhakta did, my bhakta easily attains svarga, moksha, or my abode. So there's a famous story here in West Bengal about Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, where he was told about a person who had achieved the siddhi of being able to make himself light and thus be able to walk on water. So he was brought to witness an exhibition of this siddhi, and this person walked across a river in front of him. And then everyone looked to Ramakrishna Dev for his response. Whether was he impressed? What would be his reaction to witnessing this quote-unquote miracle? And Ramakrishna said, this isn't even worth 2 paisa. This is a 2 cent siddhi. And everyone was taken aback, and he said, it only cost 2 paisa to cross the river in the boat. He saved himself 2 paisa and walked across without taking the ferry. What's the big deal? So, along these lines, the attainments of various siddhis, these are things that might impress people, that might be amazing within the context of the assumed presence of the limitations of conventional embodiment. But from an absolute perspective and a spiritual perspective, what do any of these things really get you? They don't get you anything of eternal value or of a high order of bliss as per the Ananda Mimamsa of the Taittiriya that we mentioned a minute ago. So these siddhis, they can be minimized. In modern parlance we could say, there's another siddhi called prapti siddhi, which means you can wish and anything you want appears in your hand. But we can say, you don't even need prapti siddhi anymore, you just need a phone. You can just order your food and whatever you want off the internet and it'll show up at your door. What do you need to do all this tapasya and yoga to get this siddhi for? Now we just use technology. So, along these lines, from a spiritual perspective, these worldly siddhis are not considered to be of great value. And moreover, if you follow the path of bhakti, if you wanted those things, if you so sought them as a result of your practice of bhakti, you could also have them. Here Bhagavan himself says so. So that siddhis cannot be equaled is not so, or rather siddhis can be equaled and surpassed by bhakti. The mention of, quote, yoga in this citation indicates that one following the path of bhakti can also attain the siddhis attained through the practice of yoga, should one so desire to do so. A bhakta seldom ever does, however, since siddhis are generally considered to be merely obstacles on the path of bhakti. So another statement from the 11th canto, quote, these siddhis are said to be impediments and causes of wasting time for one engaged in the highest yoga, that is, desireless bhakti yoga. Sri Chakravarti Pad adds in his commentary on this citation that siddhis are causes of amazement only for the ignorant and not for the wise. The compiler also states the same in his Lalitam Madhava Nataka. Quote, the preeminence of flourishing siddhis, samadhi attained by means of the dharma of truthfulness, cleanliness, austerity, and so forth, and even the greatness of the bliss of Brahman, that is, the attainment on the path of Jnāna, cause amazement only so long as even the fragrance of Prema, the proven herb for captivating Madhu's foe, namely Sri Bhagavan, does not reach the state of being a traveler on the path of the mind. So this is a little bit ornamental classical Sanskrit language. To say that something is quote-unquote a traveler on the path of the mind simply means that one becomes aware of it, or it becomes an object of cognition. So, in other words, as long as you don't know, or as long as you have no experience of Prema, then these other things, they may be impressive. If one doesn't know about the path of bhakti, if one doesn't know about these type of eternal prospects, then one may be impressed by notions of siddhis in the world, one may be impressed by the idea of achieving samadhi or what have you. But once one knows about the path of bhakti, once one knows about the highest order of completion in spiritual bliss that can be achieved by means of prema bhakti, then those things are no longer impressive. And here the metaphor is used of an herb for captivation. So in various types of tantra, there are methodologies whereby certain herbs are said to have the ability to conjure up certain experiences or to produce certain effects in those who ingest them. So here Rupa Goswami is comparing Prema to an herb that can captivate Bhagavan, or just as they have what's called a Boshikaran Oshudi, or a tantric spell that can be cast over a particular herb and fed to someone, such that the person becomes controlled by or captivated by the person who put the spell on the herb that the other person then ate. Then he's saying that Prema is like this Boshikaran Oshudi, or this, charged herb which can captivate Bhagavan. So, if someone comes to know, and he adds rather, even the fragrance of Prema, so not even just the herb, but even to get the scent of that herb which has the power to captivate Bhagavan. Just in other words, maybe you don't even experience Prema, maybe you don't even reach the stage of Prema Bhakti, but even to have encountered the fragrance of it, even to have come lightly in touch with it, or even aware of the idea of it, that itself is enough to cause these other things to no longer be sources of amazement, or for them to be considered impressive. So in that sense, we get the full sense. We have one more line, the fourth line, which speaks about Bhagavan's name. In the final line of the verse under discussion, Krishna's name is said to never be equaled on a scale for many reasons, such as the names being non-different from Bhagavan Sri Krishna himself, the names being like Prema, the ultimate object to be attained, and the names also being the ultimate means of attainment, or sadhana. These and other greatnesses of the name, by virtue of which the name has been called incomparable in this verse, will now be explained in the next section. Ata nama mahatmyam, now the greatness of the name. So I haven't given much extended discussion in the commentary here, because now we're going to get about 15 verses in praise of the greatness of the name. So rather than writing a commentary to summarize a bunch of them and then have them restated in verses that follow, we'll just take the coming section as an illumination of this last line of the verse, that Krishna's name can never be equaled on a scale, or namely, Krishna's name is also to be considered incomparable in its sweetness, in the joy that it creates, in its value, in its ontological identity by virtue of being non-different than Bhagavan, etc., etc. So, with that, we will enter the next prakaran, the greatness of the name. So we have first a verse from the opening verse of the Nama Komudi, which is what they estimate a 15th century text, by Lakshmidhar, which is considered an Advaita Vedantic text, but does describe many points in praise of the name, and some verses from it are extracted and appreciated by our Gaudiya Vaishnavacharyas. A couple are cited in this text, and you find them in the Charitamrita and other works of the Goswamis, such as Hari-Bhakti-Vilas. So although they didn't necessarily go along with Lakshmidhara's entire understanding of the name that he presents in his text, some of his statements they found to be highly appreciable and included in their works. So this provides an example of one. And sorry, just one sec. Looks like we've got an internet issue here. Okay, so now I'm coming to verse 16. Aṁhaḥ saṁharad akhilaṁ sakṛd udayād eva sakala-lokasya taraṇir timira-jaladhiṁ jayati jagan-maṅgalaṁ harer. Glory be to the auspiciousness of the world, the name of Hari, which by arising just once dispels all sin from all people, just as the sun dispels an ocean of darkness. So many times here in Bengali, when the people conclude some Vaishnava function and they're giving a series of jais, one popular phrase is Bhuvan Mangal Harinama Sankirtan Ki Jai, that this chanting of the names of Hari, which is the auspiciousness or the well-being of the world, praise be to that. So jagan-maṅgalaṁ, bhuvan-maṅgalaṁ are synonymous. So here we have a direct expression of that very idea in this verse. And the metaphor given in the verse is that the name of Hari is like the sun. So as the sun rises, dispels all darkness, similarly the arising of the name dispels all sin from people, and therefore is the auspiciousness of the world, or the well-being of the world. Here, two greatnesses of the name are stated. The name can remove all sins from and bestow auspiciousness upon all people throughout the world, just as the sun can remove all darkness in the sky and fill the world with light. And you'll find this verse also in the Antilila of the Charitamrita. So, I haven't elaborated here because this idea of purification of sin, this idea of bringing about auspiciousness and well-being, these points are revisited later in this section with further detail. So this is sort of giving a simple gist idea, and then verses which state those same concepts with more subtlety come hereafter. So in the following verse, the compiler cites a statement that shows the successfulness that is achieved by those who are profoundly one-pointed upon the name of Sri Bhagavan. So this first verse says, auspiciousness comes about, sin is removed, but that's a bit general. That's desirable, that's nice. But what more specifically do we achieve? What further success or satisfaction ultimately comes about? So the following verse speaks to that. caturṇāṁ vedānāṁ hṛdayamidam akṛṣya harina chaturbhir yadvarnai sputamagati nārāyaṇa-padam taretad gayantu vayamanisham atmanam-adhuna punimo janimo na hari-paritoṣāya kimapi. Drawing out the heart of the four Vedas, the name Nārāyaṇa has been clearly formed by Hari with these four phenomes, nārāyaṇa. by continuously singing which we now purify ourselves. We know of nothing else for the sake of satisfying Hari. So we'll look at the significance of this statement. Quote, from the heart, that is the essential core of the four Vedas, Bhagavan Hari draws out and clearly manifests the name Nārāyaṇa for the sake of delivering jivas bound in samsara. This profound act of graciousness on Bhagavan's part is further explained in verse 31. So the second verse of the Shikshastakam is cited there, where Mahaprabhu also stresses that the name is itself directly a profound manifestation of Bhagavan's grace. So because that topic is stated and further explained later, then we're not elaborating on that here. But this is one point, is that if we say that Bhagavan draws out this heart or essence of the Vedas for the deliverance of people, then this is no doubt an act of grace upon those people. The commentator presents a few citations that demonstrate the purifying power of the name spoken of in the verse under discussion. So, quote, O best of kings, crores of terrible sins are reduced to ashes for one within whose speech the auspicious name of Krishna appears. The Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Samaveda, and Atharva Veda are read by one by whom the two syllables Hari are spoken. In other words, if you speak the name of Hari, it is as though one has recited the Veda. So reciting the Veda is considered to be an act, a very meritorious act, which produces many benefits. So such benefit is also achieved by speaking the name of Hari. And the names of Hari certainly destroy the sins of those who have committed offense to the name. Uttered incessantly, they are certainly effective. So this is a very important statement, which we find in the Bhakti Sandarbha, the Hari Bhakti Vilas, and also is alluded to in the Namashtakam of Rupa Goswami. So, Nama-parad is considered the fundamental obstacle to all higher attainment on the path of bhakti, and it is said that Nama-parad is purified by chanting the name, or the name is so gracious that it purifies offenses even against itself. There's a verse in this same section in the Padma Puran which says that offenses committed to the deity or to Bhagavan in general are not purified by the deity or Bhagavan in general, but by Bhagavan's name. But offenses to the name are purified by the name itself. So this shows the merciful disposition of the name. But the key point here in this verse of the Padma Puran is this phrase, uttered incessantly. So Baladevi Vibhushan gives an interesting explanation of this in his commentary on the Stava Mala, where he explains the phrase uttered incessantly to mean that one, after having committed offense to the name, has to endure the consequences of those offenses and not relinquish or not give up chanting the name while undergoing the consequences of those offenses, and has to sustain and successfully act upon the resolve not to commit further offense. So uttered incessantly means tolerating the consequences of one's past offenses while sustaining and fulfilling one's resolve not to commit future offenses. If one can chant the name in that manner, then the name will purify one of the past offenses. This is in gist how he explains the point. So the point that is being made in the verse that's cited here in the Padyavali is how it is being said that we're going to purify ourselves by chanting the name. So the commentator is citing this verse in the Padma Puran to show how purifying the name is, the name not only purifies people of sin, it even purifies people of nama-parad, something that nothing else does. Furthermore, with reference to the third citation, the commentator explains that the mention of, quote, ourselves in the verse under discussion, in the phrase, by constantly singing which we now purify ourselves, indicates that by continuous chanting of the name, first the heart is purified of the 10 types of offenses to the name, and then the body is purified by the tears that pour from one's eyes and the hari-paritoṣāya that fills one's pores when sattvika bhavas manifest as a result of the purified heart becoming melted by the name. As is described in Srimad Bhagavatam, quote, that heart which cannot be transformed by Hari's names being chanted, oh, that is iron! When transformation occurs, water in the eyes and hari-paritoṣāya in the pores appear. So this is a beautiful statement. We find it also cited in the Charitamrita. So, the name of Hari, how could your heart not melt chanting this? Someone may feel, my heart has never melted after years and years of chanting, but for those who have Prema for Krishna, for them, the very opposite is so, quote, obvious or so abundant. How could your heart not melt chanting the name of Hari, who has such qualities, who's so gracious, who's so sweet, who's so beautiful, etc., when the heart is touched by that divine nature of Krishna? How can tears not pour from one's eyes? How can hari-paritoṣāya not appear on one's body when one is chanting? So, it certainly does, and we hear about in the Leela of Mahaprabhu, the Leela of many of his parshads, what profound sattvika bhavas would manifest in their figures in the midst of their chanting. So the reason the commentator is bringing this up is he's drawing out a double meaning of the word atmana. So in the verse under discussion, the author is saying, we will purify atmana, ourself. So the word atma can have many meanings. So here the commentator is taking two meanings. It can mean the mind or the heart, and it can mean the body. So he's saying that by us, quote, purifying ourselves, it means first we do citta-shuddhi, first the mind is purified or the heart is purified of the effects of past sins and offenses. And once that purification takes place and the heart is pure, then the heart will melt in the course of the chanting. That melting of the heart will give rise to tears pouring from the eyes, and those tears will then wash over one's body and purify the body. So the atma, the sense of the word atma meaning body, he takes as a second implication to say that we'll now purify ourselves, or, singing the name of Hari will now drench ourselves in our own tears by virtue of the intensity of the meltedness of the heart that we experience in chanting Bhagavan's name. So this is a rich added interpretation of the commentator. And then he comes to the next line in the verse. We know of nothing else for the sake of satisfying Hari, is then stated in the verse under discussion, oh dear, typo, because purification of the heart, citta-shuddhi, occurs as a result of Hari's being pleased, and Hari is pleased only by bhakti. So this is actually a deep statement, because in the Gita, in conventional understanding of the karma marg, the citta-shuddhi is affected by desireless action. But here it's saying, actually, citta-shuddhi is only affected by actions that are pleasing to Hari. So this is an understanding of citta-shuddhi from an absolute and a bhakti-centric perspective. And how is Hari is pleased? Hari is pleased by bhakti. So it's only bhakti that can truly purify the heart, because from the analysis of the Bhagavatam, even the desire for moksha or the desire for worldly merit, punya, are taints upon the heart. So performing karma yoga for the sake of achieving merit or for the sake of achieving jnāna are still forms of taint upon the heart, although they may purify certain sinful attitudes or unhealthy behaviors, in the absolute sense, they're not actually completing or affecting the process of chitta shuddhi in full. So it's only bhakti that does that, because it's only bhakti that pleases Bhagavan, and it's only acts that are related to and pleasing Bhagavan that give rise to a complete purification of the citta. In other words, that eliminate all other notions of intent, interest, desire, other than awareness of, other than intentness upon, other than the spirit of service to Bhagavan. So, when it says here in the verse, we know of nothing else for the sake of satisfying Hari, the implication is that there's nothing else that will purify us, nothing else which has the ability to do what is necessary to effect purification. The sense is thus that jnana, karma, and other processes are not satisfying to Hari as bhakti is, and thus cannot purify the heart without the support of bhakti. So here's a pyre in the Charitamrita, which we happen to have had class on yesterday. All these sadhanas, namely jnana, karma, yoga, etc., have very insignificant results in comparison to Krishna Bhakti. And without Krishna Bhakti, they are unable to grant strength, that is, to grant even their lesser results. The commentator thus cites the following verse, wherein the essential importance of bhakti is summarized. Quote, therefore, indeed with paramount delight, the wise always perform bhakti to Bhagavan, Vasudeva, which is purifying of the mind. So, atmanam prasidati, that this gives rise to purification of the mind. So he's citing this to give grounds for the points made earlier in the verse, that there's no other means to satisfy Hari, there's no other means to purify the self. Because, as it's said here in Bhagavatam, the wise do bhakti for the sake of, or the wise know that it is principally bhakti that affects purification of the psyche. Lastly, the commentator states that the author's usage of the verb, quote, we purify, could appear to be arrogant. So this is quite interesting. The commentator goes pretty subtle here. So he's noting that the verb punima is the agency of the action, is the bhakta, or is the speaker of the verse. So if the bhakta says, I will purify myself, or we will purify ourselves, then he's saying that could be an arrogant statement, or that could be a statement which is made from a perspective of a perception of excessive capability on one's own part to affect the outcome that one seeks to bring about. Why? Since it is actually the purifying influence of Bhagavan's name that affects purification of the psyche, rather than one's own effort to purify it. So really the name is what does the purifying, not the person. So if I say, I'll purify this, when it's really the name that's going to do the purification, then that can create a slant or an excessive emphasis on the role of my agency in the process, rather than giving precedence to or showing the prominence of the agency of the name in the effect, in the action. So the commentator raises this taint, or raises this concern about the way the verse is written, and he resolves it as follows. So it should be assumed that the author's statement in this verse is one made in private and upon request about his personal life history by personal friends who are also engaged in the practice of bhakti. Taken in this context, there is no fault. So in other words, if it was a casual remark, if it was made among people in the know, we'll let it slide. But if he were to speak this way formally, in a way as to indicate that this were actually his definitive viewpoint, in other words, if he were to speak in a way to show that he had insufficient understanding of the primacy of the name's agency, that would be problematic. But he's probably just writing this poem in the way that he's speaking to an intimate friend from his heart in a simple manner. So it's all right. We'll assume that even though he's speaking of himself as being the principal agent, that he intended it in the manner that Bhagavan's name is actually the primary agent in the effication of purification. So, cheers to the commentator for these fine points. So, I think I'll leave it at that for this evening. So, in summary, this verse says that the name of Narayan is like the very heart of the Vedas, and it's been given to the world by Narayan, or by Bhagavan himself. And by singing this name, one can satisfy Hari, and thus purify oneself. So purify oneself of what? Of other interests, of sins, of offenses, etc. So, like this, we have two verses that start this section about the greatness of the name, which have emphasized that the name gives rise to the purification of sin, the name gives rise to the attainment of well-being and the satisfaction of Bhagavan. So, in the following class, we'll continue with this Nam Mahatmya Prakaran, or this section on the greatness of the name, and we'll hear many other beautiful praises of the name's glory. So, that's it for today. Vaishnavebhyo Namo Nama. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe Shyam.